What does it mean to be a human? What is true human nature? What makes us human? These are the questions that surround the concept of the human condition. The obvious no fun answer would be that we are humans because our biology says it to be so. And sure, we are all of the same human species, but is that really a satisfying explanation? Stories and media often challenge the concept of humanity by removing certain aspects of what makes up a human. We have flesh and blood, a brain that can think, the capability for emotions, and other things along these lines. But say, for example, that we remove the flesh and blood component. Say, for instance, we create a puppet with a human brain. It can think, feel, perceive, and do just about anything a human can normally do, but it's not made of human flesh. Is there a meaningful difference between this puppet and a normal human? If so, what is it, and why is it meaningful? This is kind of a cliche example. Puppets resembling and eventually turning into humans have been a part of world culture at least ever since The Adventures of Pinocchio was written in 1881. If it were any other story, I would spend some time discussing what happens in this book here, but I shouldn't need to. Everyone is probably at least familiar with the concepts from Pinocchio's story. He's a puppet that comes to life and has to learn to be a good boy. When he tells a lie, his nose grows longer, and by the end of the story, he becomes a real boy. The story of Pinocchio has been adapted many times, most famously by Disney, but the version we'll be talking about today is a very different take on Pinocchio, to say the least. While the original Pinocchio story has gained some notoriety for being a lot darker than the Disney version, it is still ultimately a children's story. Today, we'll be discussing Lies of P, a 17 and up rated adaptation of Pinocchio. Lies of P was released in 2023 by Korean studio NeoWiz, and they turned Pinocchio into a Souls-like. I have no idea whose idea this was or how they came up with it, but I'm glad they did. It's an amazing game, and in this video, I want to talk about its wonderfully crafted world and story. This will be a thematic analysis of Lies of P. While I'll talk about gameplay here and there, this video will primarily analyze the game's story. We'll be discussing its themes, the tools it uses to convey these themes, and by the end of this video, we'll learn what Lies of P's answer is to the question, what does it mean to be human? To answer this, we'll need to talk about all of Lies of P, so here is your one and only spoiler warning. We'll be spoiling everything from the bosses we fight to the ending of the story. While I won't talk about all the aspects of the game's lore, we will be going through the entire plot from start to finish. Also keep in mind that many details in Lies of P's story are left vague, so there's a lot of room for interpretation and you may disagree with me at times. That's totally fine. I don't claim my interpretation to be any more valid than anyone else's. As an additional heads up, I recorded the footage for this playthrough on New Game Plus 4, so my stats will appear much higher than they should be, but enemies will also be dealing way more damage to me. Alright, now that we're on the same page, let's begin. Welcome to Lies of P. We begin the game sitting asleep in a chair. A blue butterfly flies over to us and says, "Geppetto's puppet, we need your help." And now, let's discuss. Yep, we're only a couple seconds into the game, but there's already a lot established here. It all has to do with the way we are addressed, Geppetto's puppet. In the very first few seconds of the story, we are dehumanized. In a literal sense, this is logical, as, well, we are a puppet. In a figurative sense, though, there's two components going on here. We are not given a name, and we are told we are Geppettos. While we know we are literally a puppet, the game is telling us that we are not even a figurative person. Instead, we're a thing, the property of Geppetto. We'll soon meet other puppets that do have names, so this omission stands out. It's also a subversion of the player's expectations. We, the player, understand Lies of P to be an adaptation of Pinocchio. We also know that Geppetto's puppet is Pinocchio. Logically, we know we must be Pinocchio, so then, why does the game not call us by our name? This is one of the fun parts of analyzing adaptations of pre-existing art. Not calling us the name Pinocchio is a change from the original story, which demonstrates intent from the writers. It's far easier to leave something alone than to change it. When something so fundamental to the story of Pinocchio as the character's own name is omitted, we must ask ourselves, why? What is the purpose of not referring to us by our name? Are we sure we're even named Pinocchio? I think the answer is very simple. Just as I said before, Lies of P wants to make it crystal clear that we are not human. If we were referred to by name, then we, the player, would subconsciously personify our character. We are literally not a human since we're a puppet, and also figuratively not a human at this point in the story. Therefore, we aren't called Pinocchio because we do not actually have a name. In fact, the word Pinocchio is never said once anywhere in Lies of P. If we do have a name, it probably isn't Pinocchio. Alright, wonderful. That's enough for the first 10 seconds of the game. Now let's chat for a bit about Lies of P's setting, as we need to establish some fluff to properly analyze the game from here. After we awaken, we slowly walk through the workshop and find a puppet lamp named Gemini. He will serve as our main companion on our journey. We choose a weapon, open the door, and exit into Krot Central Station. Krot is the fictional city in which Lies of P takes place. It's inspired by Europe, but doesn't resemble any one country in particular. Not too long ago, Krot was a prosperous city with highly advanced technology. It used robotic puppets that served humans in all sorts of endeavors. You had puppets that were butlers, construction workers, entertainment, and even police officers. These puppets were invented by the legendary craftsman Geppetto, and we are one of them. The puppets operate using a mysterious blue substance called Ergo, which was discovered underground one day, and people quickly realized its potential. We'll have more to say about Ergo later. Unfortunately, Krot has fallen into disarray and become a dangerous place because of not one, but two catastrophes: the spread of the petrification disease and the puppet frenzy. The petrification disease is as it sounds. It's a contagious infection that causes the body to slowly turn to stone and is fatal. The infected of Krot were quarantined to their homes, and many are still quarantined now. A deadly contagious disease is terrible, but at least Krot had the puppets to serve infected humans who could no longer work or leave their homes. Tragically though, one day something went horribly wrong. The puppets started attacking humans. Those who weren't already in hiding or quarantine were hunted by the puppets, and to this day, they wander the streets, looking for more humans to kill. Puppets serve as the game's major enemy type. When we exit the workshop, we find two hostile police officer puppets on patrol. They're our first enemy encounter of the game, so they're nothing too crazy, just some basic obstacles, but they make it clear that, despite us being a puppet, the other puppets are not our friends. So we follow the Blue Butterfly's guidance, travel the streets of Krot, admire the amazing atmosphere and scenery, fight our first major boss, the Parade Master puppet, and arrive at the gates of Hotel Krot. Sophia warns us that the hotel's security system prevents puppets from entering, but we are a special puppet. Unlike other puppets, we have the ability to lie. Once we arrive at the hotel doors, the security system asks us who we are. We're given two choices. We can tell the truth and say we are a puppet, or we can lie and say we are human. We choose to lie, and the security system lets us know that, according to the Grand Covenant, puppets cannot lie. We are welcomed inside as a human, our springs react, whatever that means, and the game truly begins. After entering Hotel Krat, we meet Sophia in person. She tells us that we must have a lot of questions and Geppetto will have answers. He was last seen heading to Elysion Boulevard, a dangerous place taken over by the puppets. So now we must travel to Elysion Boulevard and find our father. But first, let's get acquainted with Hotel Krat, which will serve as our hub for the entire game. The hotel is the last safe haven in all of Krat, so we've got several refugees living here. Firstly, we have Lady Antonia, the hotel's owner. She's an elderly woman who has unfortunately been afflicted with the petrification disease, and she recognizes us as Geppetto's puppet. She says that Geppetto's son is like family to her, and she gives us a set of clothes that she was holding on to. Pause. What did Lady Antonia just say? Geppetto's son? That is a pretty major change from the original Pinocchio story. We'll have a lot to say about Geppetto's son later, but we don't know enough about him right now. The other residents of Hotel Krat include Polendina, Lady Antonia's puppet butler, Eugenie, a blacksmith, and most importantly, Spring, the cat. Polendina is the general shopkeeper of the game, and Eugenie is who helps us upgrade our weapons. Polendina has some interesting things to tell us about, though, like the aforementioned Grand Covenant. It's a set of laws that all puppets are imbued with that they must obey. First law, all puppets must obey their creator's commands. Second law, a puppet may not harm humans. Third law, a puppet protects and serves humans and the city of Krat. Fourth law, a puppet cannot lie. Clearly, something has gone very wrong with the Grand Covenant, as we know puppets started harming humans. We also know that we must not be bound by the Grand Covenant, given that we have the ability to lie. With this crucial piece of information in our back pocket, we head toward Elysion Boulevard to find Geppetto. While our character is busy doing that, I think it'd be a good time to talk about something else, our springs. The humanity system is a core gameplay feature in Lies of P. It's a hidden stat that increases as you perform certain actions. You know it does when the text "your springs are reacting" flashes across the screen, like we saw when we lied to enter Hotel Krat. I'm getting ahead of ourselves a bit, but it's important to know that to achieve the game's best ending, you need to increase your humanity to a high level. So then, what can we do to increase our humanity? The typical advice is to do human things that puppets can't normally do. For example, the most common method of gaining humanity is by going against the Grand Covenant via lying. However, you can also gain humanity by participating in human activities, such as listening to records and praying in front of a religious statue. Interestingly, these recreational activities are not prohibited by the Grand Covenant. This implies that there must be some other metric that quantifies what counts as a human activity. As we are rewarded for reaching high humanity with the game's best ending, we know that the story writers encourage us to gain humanity. The logical conclusion is we can read acts that give humanity as something the writers approve of for being human. Every time we tell a lie, the game rewards us with a humanity increase. However, most lies we tell in the game are actually white lies that most regular humans would do. For instance, on Elysion Boulevard, we meet a weeping woman by the window of her apartment. She tells us that she has the petrification disease, and her husband and baby have escaped to City Hall. All she wishes is to see her baby again, and she asks if you can get her baby back for her. When we arrive at City Hall, we unfortunately find no survivors. All that we find resembling a baby is a broken baby puppet. When the woman sees the baby puppet, she believes it to be her real baby. She's too far gone to understand that her baby is dead and this is just a puppet. Or maybe she does understand on some level, but is in extreme denial. She then says to us, "Isn't my baby adorable?" And we are given a choice. We can tell her the truth that what she's holding is a puppet, or we can agree and tell her that it's a cute baby. There's no need to be cruel to this poor, sick woman. She's clearly on her last legs from the petrification disease, and insinuating that her baby is dead will only make her suffer in her final days. Lying to her is the human act compared to telling her the truth. Because of all this, I would argue that we gain humanity from lying because the lie is the human response, and not because lying violates the Grand Covenant. In the original Pinocchio story, lying is portrayed as a total negative and honesty is encouraged. This is a fine enough message for children, but it's pretty immature in reality. Lies of P corrects this moral by continually placing you in situations where lying is the far better option than telling the truth. It does this so frequently that I actually think it leans a bit too much in the opposite direction from Pinocchio. In Lies of P, it's almost always in your best interest to lie for humanity gain. The prompts for lying or telling the truth all portray lying as the humane option, and there's never a situation where, when given the choice, telling the truth is better than telling a lie. This is my main criticism of the game's story. It challenges the virtue of total honesty from Pinocchio, but fails to give it enough nuance to demonstrate that both truths and lies have their place. I think the game should have included a couple of quests where telling the truth is correct and gives humanity, while lying is incorrect. Lies of P does successfully convey lying as a human act though, so it's not the end of the world. Now that we've got all that explained, what progress have we made in the game? Well, we traveled through Elysion Boulevard, and we found a stalker known as the Mad Donkey. Stalkers are like Krot's vigilantes, and they all wear animal masks. It's Lies of P's way of incorporating the animal characters from the original Pinocchio story. The Mad Donkey is banging on a carriage, yelling that Geppetto needs to come out and answer for his crimes. The Mad Donkey claims that Geppetto knows the truth about the puppet frenzy, and that he's in league with the alchemists. The Mad Donkey then notices us and recognizes us as the devil's puppet, and he attacks us. We defend ourselves and kill him, and once we do, the door to the carriage opens, and Geppetto steps out. We look at our arm and shirt covered in human blood, a new sensation for us. We slowly look up, and Geppetto smiles. Geppetto says he's happy to finally meet us, and knows we must have so many questions for him, but before any of that can happen, we need to quell the puppets at City Hall. He knows it's dangerous, but he asks us to go anyway, seeing as he has no other choice. And, well, that's exactly what we do now. We reach City Hall and find it's currently occupied by the terrifying Scrapped Watchman, the game's second major boss. The Watchman is a great fight with a really depressing backstory, but we don't need to get into all the details right now. I do want to shout out Lies of P's world building though, since practically every major character or enemy has its place in Krot's history, especially the Watchman. We now return to Hotel Krot and finally get that long-awaited conversation with Geppetto. He's relieved to see us return and asks for our forgiveness for making us do something dangerous. Immediately after, though, he asks us to do another dangerous task. Travel to the nearby factory, Vanini Works, beyond Elysion Boulevard. The puppets are using it to make more of themselves. Geppetto's friend and owner of the factory, Vanini, went on his own to stop the puppets, but he never returned. Geppetto asks us to go save him and shut down the factory. The game then sort of awkwardly transitions to a different cutscene where Geppetto tells us about our P organ. Yes, that's really what it's called. It's essentially our heart, and it's how we operate. We can bolster our P organ using quartz we collect throughout the game, and this unlocks cool new skills and upgrades. Afterward, we cut back to Geppetto reminding us that the hotel is the last safe place in Krot. He warns us against telling anyone we meet about the hotel, especially stalkers and alchemists. He reiterates we should be wary of dangerous people, and bids us farewell with a reminder to always be a good boy to him. On our way to the factory, we find a ringing phone. If we answer, we're treated to a riddle from the self-proclaimed king of riddles, Arlecchino. He gives us the Sphinx's famous riddle, of which the correct answer is human. Answering the riddle correctly earns us a humanity point, and Arlecchino congratulates us. He then says, quote, "That said, how do we know you didn't just get lucky? Even a stopped clock is right twice a day, and even a puppet can be accidentally correct just by random chance." Let's put a bookmark here because this is really important. We'll hear more from Arlecchino later. We soon arrive at the factory, travel through it, and we find Vanini still alive. He's a nervous wreck, but thankfully, we are here to save the day. We fight our third major boss of the game, Fuoco, and we shut down the factory, thereby dealing a significant blow to the puppet's forces. We also rescue Venini's butler puppet, Pulcinella, who is defeated by Fuoco. Luckily, he's a puppet, so he can be fixed up, and Venini and Pulcinella will become residents of Hotel Krat. Venini's actually been mentioned all throughout the game. There are various posters and scraps of paper we can find that reference him and his puppet empire. He's the richest man in Krat. Venini and Geppetto are good friends and also business partners. Geppetto would design the puppets and Venini would mass produce them. We can find a note left by Venini on our way to the factory that states that, regardless of the puppet frenzy's cause, it is Venini's responsibility to find a solution. He will head to the factory alone to try to shut it down, and if anything happens to him, he will leave it all to his friend Geppetto, who he trusts more than anybody. The next time we speak to Venini at the hotel, he will vocalize how he's doing all he can to figure out the cause of the puppet frenzy and how to stop it. His current theory is that someone took control of the puppets somehow, but the only one he can think of with that power would be the King of Puppets, who currently resides on Rosa Isabel Street, a puppet stronghold. He doesn't truly believe in the theory, but he has no evidence for anything else at the moment. He decides to investigate the Ergo itself and see if the Ergo was somehow corrupted or hijacked. Our next task is to travel to St. Frangelico's Cathedral. According to Geppetto, there's another group of refugees in the cathedral that are being looked over by Archbishop Andreas. The hotel has recently lost contact with them though, so we need to go check to make sure everything is well. On our way to the cathedral, we encounter something strange. A grotesque, deformed human that's spewing blue blood. This is our introduction to the second major enemy type of the game, carcasses. To put it simply, well, they're zombies. As you probably could have guessed already, the carcasses are our first sign that something terrible has happened at the cathedral. At the bridge leading to the cathedral, we see an interesting sight. A group of carcasses and a group of puppets are fighting each other. This is consistent with in-game lore found in the factory, which stated that puppets were marching on the cathedral. For some reason, it seems the puppets and carcasses are enemies. These carcasses make quick work of the puppets though, and now we're left to finish them off. Unfortunately, as we travel through the cathedral, we find it's filled with carcasses and soon learn that there are no survivors. The Archbishop sold out to the Alchemists, a faction that we keep hearing about but haven't met yet. The Archbishop let the Alchemists do whatever horrible experiments they wanted, and, well, it turned the Archbishop into a literal monster. Andreas himself is our fourth major boss of the game. He transformed into some weird frog, serpent, spider monster thing. It's pretty gross. Our next task is to liberate the Malum district, which has been taken over by a gang of stalkers known as the Black Rabbit Brotherhood. We reach their base and they threaten to put us in the Liar's Coffin. The original Pinocchio story has 4 black rabbits carrying a coffin around to take people to the afterlife, and I think turning them into a major boss is a super fun idea. Speaking of super fun, the boss fight itself. The Black Rabbit Brotherhood is a gang fight, which are infamous in Souls-likes for being bad, but the Brotherhood is exceptionally well designed. The main boss is the eldest brother, and the 3 smaller ones will rotate into the fight one by one. You're never unfairly attacked on 2 fronts without prior warning. It's a reasonable challenge to focus on the smaller siblings whenever they pop up, while keeping the eldest at bay. We now kill the eldest and the remaining 3 siblings flee. Hopefully, they won't be causing us any more trouble. Hopefully. After defeating the Brotherhood, we enter their base and we discover a painting. A painting of a boy that looks very similar to us. No, even Gemini points out that it looks exactly like us. It's pretty creepy. Astute players will notice the boy in the painting is wearing the same outfit that Lady Antonia gave us at the start of the game. Astute players will also likely put 2 and 2 together to figure out who this is a painting of. We take the painting with us, ride the Brotherhood's elevator, and discover they actually have direct access to Hotel Krat. I think the implication here is the Brotherhood have been secretly stealing things from the hotel, including this painting. We take the painting to Geppetto, and he admits the painting is his. He had it commissioned several years ago, and he thought it was lost, but he's glad that we retrieved it for him. He hangs it on the wall where it remains for the rest of the game. As you can probably guess by now, this painting depicts Geppetto's son. Now that we've shut down the factory, stabilized the cathedral, and liberated the Malum district, it's finally time to head to Rosa Isabel Street and take down the King of Puppets. He's surrounded himself with many dangerous puppets though, and the puppets all seem to worship the king. If there's anyone who could have caused the puppet frenzy, it's the puppets' leader. So we travel through the streets, fight a terrifying and weirdly strong mad clown mini-boss with an amazing backdrop and music, and find ourselves at the Krat Opera House. This is probably my favorite area in the game. I just find it so haunting but beautiful at the same time. Our goal is making it to the Opera House's theater, and once we do, we're treated to a play. Why don't we watch it together? Alright, what did we just watch? It was clearly supposed to depict us and Geppetto. The Geppetto puppet took out our heart and put it in a generic nameless puppet. The King of Puppets himself then jumped down, looking proud of himself. He offered his hand to us, but we know he's likely the cause of the puppet frenzy, so we smacked his hand away. His reaction to our rejection was not of anger, but of sadness. Strange, but there's no time to dwell on it as the battle begins. We fight the king in a dramatic showdown fitting for an opera house until eventually, we reduce his HP to 0 and something unexpected happens. The King of Puppets breaks down and the casing for his chest opens, and we can see inside his chest is another puppet that looks suspiciously similar to us. The inner puppet awakens, but just as he does, the King of Puppets' body overheats and explodes into flames. In the aftermath, the humanoid puppet emerges with half of his face burnt off from the explosion. He lifts his scythe and he challenges us. And now we enter phase 2 of the fight. Romeo, King of Puppets. On my first playthrough, Romeo was the hardest boss in the game for me. He took me the longest of any boss fight by far, and even on repeat playthroughs I struggle. He's also my favorite boss fight in the game. I absolutely love bosses that are similar to the player character, and I love the arena being a burning opera house stage. It's really cool. Now is probably a good time to mention that every puppet boss up to, and especially including Romeo, has been making these weird static noises at us during battle. We can't quite make out what they mean, but Romeo sure has a lot to say. After a long-fought battle, we eventually manage to defeat Romeo, and he drops a necklace simply titled, Someone's Necklace. It's got a large M engraved on it, and its description reads, "A necklace once worn by the King of Puppets. It is engraved with a boy's scribblings. To Romeo, your friend C." The boy resented his father for not showing any interest in him. Perhaps in protest, he gave his graduation necklace to Romeo, a friend he admired. After we defeat Romeo, we go backstage to see if we can glean any more information about the puppets. Outside the theater, surprisingly, we find Geppetto, who congratulates us on defeating the King of Puppets. Our battle against the puppets may be over, but there's still far more to the war. Yep, the King of Puppets was roughly the midpoint boss of the game, and we still have a lot to go. Our attention will now mostly focus on the petrification disease, the carcasses, and the mysterious alchemists, although we still need to figure out the origin of the puppet frenzy. Geppetto tells us that there are rumors the alchemists have developed a cure for the petrification disease at the Grand Exhibition, and even though he doesn't trust the alchemists, he asks us to go check it out for Antonia's sake. Before we head to the Grand Exhibition though, let's return to Hotel Krat quickly, as it looks like Sophia has something she wants to tell us. When we speak to her, she notices the necklace we picked up from the King of Puppets. She tells us it's a necklace from the Monad Charity House, an orphanage in Krat. However, before she can finish her full thought, she points out that we don't look too well and asks us if we are okay. And then something very peculiar happens. The screen fades to black, and we hear a boy's voice say the name Carlo. And then something inconceivable. Something so outrageous that nobody could ever guess it was possible. What is it, you may ask? Well, our hair grows longer. We can all agree that, as time passes, human hair grows longer, right? Puppet hair would not, since they possess artificial bodies. But we're not quite a puppet anymore, although we're also not yet human. Sophia tells us that if we desire to be a human, we should keep acting as we are now. Our hair growing longer is a sign that we're on the right track, but Sophia makes it clear that we aren't done yet. Like I said before, we're just over the halfway point through the game, so there's still plenty of time for us to achieve humanity. If we go visit Geppetto now, he'll be surprised at our physical change. He tells us he's glad that we're growing, but something in his voice wavers a bit. He reminds us to always be a good boy to him, and as we leave his room, we can hear Geppetto say to himself, "I can't predict how you'll change. How to proceed?" Alright, we just learned a ton of important lore information. Let's do a quick check-in. At this point in the game, we, the player, probably have a pretty good idea of what happened in the past based on everything we've learned so far. We know Geppetto had a son, who, for reasons unknown, is no longer around. Our character also heavily resembles Geppetto's son. We can put 2 and 2 together and conclude that Geppetto created us in his son's image, likely out of grief due to his son's passing. As all of you viewers are very intelligent and perceptive, you have also probably guessed that Geppetto's son's name was Carlo. That then begs the question, is our character Carlo? Well, think of the King of Puppets play. It portrayed Geppetto taking the heart out of a puppet that resembled us, but if we resemble Carlo, then maybe that puppet was supposed to actually be Carlo, and the King of Puppets was showing us how we came to be. Geppetto's son died, and he took his heart or soul or ergo or something, put it in us, and in a way, his son was reborn. If this is true, that then begs the question, how did the King of Puppets know this? The most logical explanation is that the King of Puppets went through this process himself. He most likely used to be a human named Romeo. Since we're big fans of the original Pinocchio story here, we can also use our knowledge of the source material to support our theory. In the original Pinocchio story, Pinocchio's best friend is named Romeo. While we may not be named Pinocchio, we're definitely the Pinocchio stand-in of the story at least. Remember the necklace description we got? To Romeo, your friend, C. Does the C stand for Carlo? Who else could it be? But if the C does stand for Carlo, then what does this part about the boy resenting his father mean? Did Carlo and Geppetto not have a good relationship? Wait, hang on, if this necklace is from the Monad Charity House, does that mean Carlo lived there instead of with Geppetto? Sophia did say that many kids train there to become stalkers or alchemists or the like, so it's possible Carlo was just enrolled in an education program there. That said, all signs are pointing to Geppetto, at best, having been an absentee father to Carlo. These were my thoughts on my first playthrough of the game, and I'm pretty sure it's the thought process the developers wanted players to have at this point. There's still a lot we don't know though. The only way to get answers is to press onward, so off we go to the grand exhibition. On our way, we see puppets exhibiting symptoms of grief. They all look like they're mourning the king and have lost motivation to fight. Good news for us, although it is a little unnerving that robotic puppets are expressing emotions like this. We travel through the Lorenzini arcade, which has been overrun by carcasses. As we're about to head out, we suddenly hear Vanini's voice coming through the Stargazer. He's figured out how to communicate through Ergo, and he suspects the King of Puppets was doing this to command the other puppets. Great progress. We'll check back in with Vanini later. We arrive at the grand exhibition and see it's gone to chaos. It's filled with puppets and littered with dead bodies, as well as a bunch of these weird breakable vats filled with blue liquid. We have another call from Arlecchino here. Now is probably as good a time as any to talk about what Arlecchino does for us. Whenever we answer one of his riddles correctly, we gain humanity, and he gives us a Trinity key as our reward. These keys can be used to unlock doors to Trinity Sanctums, locations hidden throughout the map. Inside the sanctums, we find 3 chairs in a triangular formation that surround a book containing scripture at its center. There is also a message written in blood on the walls. The messages always give details about a murder of someone in the area we find the sanctum. The game never actually explains what these sanctums were for, but I think the 3 chairs imply that the Trinity was a trio of people that used these rooms for meetings of some kind. What these sanctums were used for isn't important for our purposes, but I wanted to mention them since I find this aspect of the lore to be very intriguing. Back to the present. Arlecchino does his usual greeting, and then he says something so bluntly and nonchalantly that I took it for granted on my first playthrough of the game. He says, quote, "If your goal is to study the human condition, there's no better way than my riddle position." Study the human condition? Wait, isn't that the thing I brought up at the very beginning of this video? Arlecchino is telling us in plain text that if we want to hear about the human condition, we need to pay attention to what he tells us. And, well, he's actually right. Arlecchino is one of the most important characters in the game for answering our overarching question. What does it mean to be human? I promised we would answer it by the end of the video, but we're not ready to tackle it yet. Instead, let's add another bookmark here. We will be revisiting Arlecchino later. At the end of the exhibition, we are challenged by Victor, champion of the arena. He is strapped with all these test tubes filled with that same blue liquid we've seen, and his skin looks, well, like he's a zombie. We actually find lore scraps that tell us that Victor had died, but apparently that wasn't enough to stop him. The alchemists were able to revive him somehow, and now he's their champion speaking dogma about ushering in a world of truth. We defeat Victor, but we're not the one who finishes the job. That honor goes to the suddenly arrived mysterious knight. Before we can even process what just happened, we hear clapping. The knight kneels, and in walks Simon Manus, leader of the alchemists. Simon proceeds to give us a massive lore dump / villain monologue. Some of it we had probably already guessed by now, but some, like his plans, are new. He begins by telling us that he and Geppetto used to be colleagues but had a falling out due to ideological differences. To nobody's surprise, the alchemists were the one who spread the petrification disease. The blue liquid we've been seeing was marketed as a cure, and while that's technically true, it was imperfect. Almost everyone who took the blue liquid died and became the horrifying carcasses we've grown all too familiar with. Some, though, did not. Simon refers to the survivors as evolved humans, and he seeks to advance humanity to a new era through surviving the petrification disease. Those who survive gain a resolve and mind so pure that they can no longer lie. Alright, it is a little bit corny, maybe a bit too on the nose, if you will, for a story based on Pinocchio, but that is Simon's goal and why he did what he did. During his monologue, Simon will ask us for our opinion on what the alchemists have done. We can tell the truth and say he's creating monsters, or lie and tell him he's created a hope for a cure from the petrification disease. This humanity gain is a little unintuitive, so I wanted to bring it up. Obviously, we know that Simon is in the wrong here, and his wishes for a world absent of lies are ridiculous when the cost is turning most of Krat into carcasses. It's definitely human to feel anger toward him, but are we in a position to speak our mind? We just had a long fight with Victor, so we're worn down. There's also the Night Bodyguard, ready to attack when needed. Lying here is a human reaction for self-preservation. Simon seems to not want to harm us at the moment, but if we anger him, then he might change his mind. While nothing bad happens if we do tell the truth, it's understandable to lie here. At the end of Simon's monologue, he will reveal one more thing that we've probably figured out by now, but finally get explicit confirmation of. Ergo is made from former human beings. It's essentially crystallized memories. While Ergo isn't literally a human soul, it functions similarly for the purposes of the story. Simon then welcomes us to come to the Isle of the Alchemists to try to stop him, and he leaves. Let's pause here and have another quick think. If Ergo is made from former human beings, and puppets run on Ergo, then does that mean that all puppets have what is essentially a human soul in them already? We've already reasoned that we are probably Geppetto's son Carlo in puppet form, which means we probably carry Carlo's Ergo. Do you know what this means? Lies of P has just set the foundation for the debate on what makes us human. We're smart enough to know that if puppets have human souls, the game is going to eventually propose the question, what makes puppets different from regular humans? Is there a meaningful difference? By the end of the game, I promise you this question will be thoroughly answered. For now, we continue on. Our next destination is the Barren Swamp, a graveyard for puppets. We're in search of a golden Ergo, which can be used to power a submarine that could take us to the Alchemist Isle. While there's a lot of interesting lore to be found in the swamp, for our purposes, we don't need to spend too much time here. The boss of the Barren Swamp is the Green Monster. The game never explains exactly what the Green Monster is, and I honestly think that makes it cooler. It's the only real enemy in the game that is not quite a puppet, carcass, or human. I think technically the game classifies it as a carcass, but it's probably just a creature created from the alchemist's experiments. The second phase of the fight is really cool, by the way. The Barren Swamp is a puppet graveyard, right? And in the swamp is a body of a puppet we've already killed, the Scrapped Watchman. The Green Monster will possess the Scrapped Watchman's dead body, and the second phase of the fight becomes a pseudo-rematch with the Watchman. This is one of my favorite fights in the game, and I think it's a really clever way to incorporate a rematch boss. We acquire the Golden Ergo after defeating the Green Monster, but while we were in the swamp, we could hear a massive explosion coming from the Krot Central Station area, where the game started. We go to check it out, and find it's been completely overrun by the carcasses. It's a total wreck and has basically transformed into an entirely new area that we must now travel through to get back to the hotel. We also see the carcasses have started infecting puppets, similar to what the Green Monster did to the Scrapped Watchman, creating hybrid enemy types. Just like in the swamp, there's a ton of new lore information for us to find here, but I'll leave that for another time. As we progress through the ruined Krot, we'll feel an earthquake and hear Sophia calling out to us through the Ergo. The hotel is under attack, and we need to get back as quickly as possible. Blocking the entrance to the hotel, though, is our old friend, the Parade Master. This time, it's been taken over by the carcasses, and the corrupted Parade Master is our 9th major boss fight. We defeat the Parade Master once and for all and enter the hotel. It's been ransacked. Sophia is waiting for us, and she tells us that Geppetto has been kidnapped by the Stalkers. Stalkers that we're all too familiar with. The Fox, the Cat, and the Black Rabbit Brotherhood. Sophia suspects Simon is the one pulling the strings, and she asks us to go check on everyone else. Luckily, everyone is unharmed, albeit a bit shaken up. At some point in the past, the hotel and the alchemists were allies, so there exists a secret passageway that the alchemists know about that they can use to access the hotel from their base. We couldn't use this originally since it was sealed from the alchemist's side, but now that they've broken it open to let the stalkers in, we can go through it ourselves and enter the Relic of Trismegistus. This is the shortest chapter of the game by far. The area isn't very big and there's only a couple of elite enemies in our way before we reach the boss arena. The most notable optional content here is the game's final ringing telephone. Our previous calls with Arlecchino showed that he's got at least a few screws loose, but in this final call, he really shows his true colors. His final question to us is less of a question and more of a demand for a confession. Is Geppetto's creation a killer? The correct answer Arlecchino is looking for here is yes, but the human answer here is to say no. We probably don't think of ourselves as a killer, given that everything we've killed has been out of self-defense, right? It is kind of fuzzy how conscious puppets are, and there are maybe some enemies that didn't need to die, but we answer no, and Arlecchino says something interesting. He says, quote, "You should reconsider that conscience of yours. It's charming, but all this guilt's just such a bore. Or maybe there's no way you can. Perhaps it's part of becoming a man." Remember our bookmarks from our other conversations with Arlecchino? Well, let's add another one to the pile. Sorry, we're still not quite ready to make sense of them, but you might be able to figure out where I'm going with these. Just hang tight, we'll be able to connect the dots soon. Regardless of our answer, Arlecchino will give us the Chosen One's Trinity Key as our reward. We'll find where we can use it soon enough, but for now, let's continue progressing. Our 10th major boss of the game is a rematch versus the Black Rabbit Brotherhood. This time, the 3 younger siblings all attack us at the same time. Well, not really. Only one of them will be aggroed at any one time, and the other 2 will occasionally throw projectiles, but we do have to deal with all 3 of them eventually. I think it's another pretty well-designed gang fight. After we kill 2 of the siblings, though, the eldest brother will suddenly revive from his coffin. The Brotherhood struck a deal with the alchemists, and it looks like they were able to revive the eldest brother in a similar manner that they did for Victor. We managed to beat him a second time though, and now we're finally rid of the Black Rabbit Brotherhood for good. Before we head to the alchemist's lair, we return to the hotel for our final preparations. Let's talk with Vanini again and see what he's up to. And, well, would you look at that? Vanini has managed to mostly decipher the puppets' messages through their Ergo communication lines. He found a message from the King of Puppets, but was having trouble making it out. He asks us to give it a listen, probably because we are a puppet and might have better luck than him. This is what we hear.
Carlo, I hope you can hear me. The laws of the Grand Covenant bind us. We're his puppets. First law, all puppets must obey their creator's commands. Law 0, the creator's name is Geppetto. Giuseppe Geppetto.
Vanini couldn't make out the full message, but we heard it clear as day. Vanini asks us what, or who, was the cause of the puppet frenzy. We can tell him the truth and say it was Geppetto, or lie and say we couldn't hear anything either. While it is probably correct to tell Vanini the truth here, I think it's understandable for lying to be considered the human response. After all, Geppetto is our father, and we also know Geppetto and Vanini are good friends. Geppetto is currently kidnapped by the alchemists, so we can't even ask for his side of the story right now. We don't want to believe Geppetto could do something so awful, and so we lie, even if in our heart we know it to be wrong. The Grand Covenant never failed. It was working exactly as designed. Geppetto created a backdoor in the Grand Covenant that allowed him to command the puppets to do as he wished. It seems like Romeo discovered this and tried to warn us, but we couldn't understand him. Vanini gives us another message left by the King of Puppets, and we can take it to his Stargazer to hear it. It's a desperate attempt at Romeo trying to contact us. He remembers us as Carlo. Carlo and Romeo were best friends that grew up together in the Monad Charity House. He's been commanding the puppets to protect the humans as best he can. This is why the puppets and carcasses fight. Romeo tried to recruit us to his side, but we just couldn't understand him. He sent messengers to us, the Parade Master, the Scrapped Watchman, Fuoco. We killed all of them. He never wanted to fight us. The hand he reached out to us before our fight versus him was genuine. On New Game Plus, you'll be able to understand the puppet's speech. Even back at the bridge leading to the cathedral when we saw puppets and carcasses fighting, the puppet's battle cry was, "The king says protect all humans." Since I recorded footage for this video on New Game Plus, I've had to do some sneaky editing to avoid showing you this dialogue too early. During our battle versus Romeo, He realizes that we don't remember him and can't understand his speech. That's why he attacks us. He knows we're a pawn of Geppetto, so from his point of view, defeating us is his only option. The only way we'll be able to settle things once and for all is by going to the Alchemist's Isle, stopping Simon's plans, and saving Geppetto so we can find out the truth behind the puppet frenzy. And so, we take the submarine to their island. Waiting for us on the beach is Sophia? Here, she finally tells us the truth, although it's kind of obvious in hindsight. The Sophia we've been interacting with at the hotel is not her real body. She's been communicating with us through Ergo the entire time. Her full name is Sophia Monad, and she's the daughter of Valentinus Monad, the original leader of the Alchemists. Simon used to be her father's right-hand man, but he hijacked the Alchemists when Valentinus died. Sophia's been imprisoned by the Alchemists ever since due to her unique power over Ergo and time itself. She's actually the in-universe reason why we revive after battle. She rewinds our time whenever we die. She admits that she didn't wake us up to save Krot, but rather to save herself. She asks us if we find her body to give her peace and bring her suffering to an end. We now travel across the island's beach where the wind howls with Ergo itself. As a result, scattered memories are everywhere, memories of Carlo. We see impactful memories from Carlo's childhood, including meeting Romeo and the aftermath of the graduation ceremony from the Monad charity house. It seems like Geppetto didn't even attend Carlo's graduation, and Carlo resented him for it. Ultimately, the memories conclude with Carlo's death. We don't see how he died here, but an in-game loading screen tip lets us know that Carlo died from the petrification disease. I don't have footage of this, but you can trust me on this one. As we journey through the Arch Abbey, let's briefly talk about where we think the plot is going. This is the final chapter of the game, and we can't help but think of our knowledge of the original Pinocchio story's ending. At the end of Pinocchio, he turns into a real boy. However, Lies of P has consistently been subverting our expectations. In this game, lying is good. So then, what will this story's conclusion be? Near the bottom of the Arch Abbey, we can find the final Trinity Sanctum, only unlockable by the Chosen One's Trinity Key. This sanctum is much different from the others. We enter and see the sanctum in disarray, and at its back corner is a puppet chained and stabbed against the wall. The puppet is still alive. We go to talk to it, and we finally have our first face-to-face conversation with the King of Riddles, Arlecchino. Yep, he's been a puppet the entire time. He was able to call us through the telephones by tapping into the immense amount of Ergo gathered here, similar to what Sophia did. Turns out, Arlecchino is actually one of the oldest puppets in Krot. He was made before the Grand Covenant was designed, so he was never bound to it. At some point, his ego awoke, and he discovered that all puppets' Ergo used to be that of a human. He hates humans for trapping puppets in metal prisons, and exacted revenge by becoming a serial killer. His favorite murder he's ever done was that of Vanini's parents. He killed Vanini's parents right in front of him when he was a child, but he spared Vanini because he was curious what would happen to him as he grew older. When Vanini grew up, he came up with the idea of the Grand Covenant so that nobody would ever go through the same tragedy that he did. Arlecchino has one final question for us, one that mirrors the very first question we ever had to answer. Are we a puppet or are we a human? We claim to be a human once again, and Arlecchino is ecstatic. He believes that we are human, and he also believes he and all other puppets are human too because they can think, feel, love, and hate. Unfortunately for Arlecchino, he's close but not quite there. Thematically, this is why he remains shackled. He's close to enlightenment, but he remains trapped by puppetry, and we can choose to kill him if we want. Our next destination is our 11th major boss fight, Simon's Knight, Laxazia. She's an evolved human who survived the petrification disease and now serves Simon's ambitions. She's one of the hardest bosses in the game, but we managed to defeat her and we move on to find Sophia. She's imprisoned by Ergo itself. Somber music is playing. It seems like she's barely even conscious, but with what little thoughts she has, she vocalizes her desire for us to end her suffering again. We're now given a choice. We can choose to give her peace, or we can try to liberate her from the Arch Abbey, finding a different way to save her. We choose to. Eventually, we reach the cell where Geppetto is being held. We unlock the door and finally get to speak with our father again. Geppetto says it saddens him to see us in such a dangerous place, but promises that this will be the last time he asks something of us. After this, it will all be over. Simon has gone mad, and we have to stop him. Before we do, though, Geppetto asks us if he was a trustworthy father. The truth here is no, and the lie here is yes. Admittedly, I don't really like this conversation, at least in the way it's been phrased. I think we've gotten enough information now to where we shouldn't feel the need to spare Geppetto's feelings. I also think it's kind of strange to ask if he was a trustworthy father specifically. We get humanity for lying to him, probably because our character is still holding on to a sliver of hope that Geppetto had a good reason for doing everything he did, and we move on. We reach the top of the Arch Abbey and find Simon has been transformed into a giant hunchback with something growing out of his shoulder. Okay, so I haven't mentioned this yet because it hasn't been relevant, but Simon's ultimate plan to bring about his world of truth is to revive an angel that fell to Krot many years ago. The only thing surviving from that angel is one of its arms, which became known as the Arm of God. This Arm of God holds an immense amount of divine magical power, and Geppetto stole it when he left the alchemists. Simon stole it back while we were in the barren swamp. We manage to defeat Simon, but he rips off his cloak to reveal the awakening god growing out of his body. The reborn god makes contact with an angel, giving it life, and we enter Phase 2. Fortunately, we are skilled enough to defeat them both, and we bring an end to Simon's schemes. We also retrieve the Arm of God from him. In his last moments, Simon reveals he was in love with Sophia, and he asks us what we did with her. We can choose to lie to him or tell the truth, and which is which depends on what we did earlier. So we make our choice, and Simon begins to fade away. His final words echo in the wind.
It's fine if I'm gone. Let me warn. Watch out, fortune hunter.
While the plot of evolving humanity, the puppet frenzy, the petrification disease, and all that is incredibly gripping, at the end of the day, Lies of P is a story about a father and his son. So our final confrontation is not with Simon Manus. Instead, we descend deep into the Arch Abbey. On our way down, we have an ominous conversation with Gemini about puppets becoming humans. At the bottom, we find Geppetto standing in an arena of corpses with a black suitcase at his side. We've just retrieved the Arm of God from Simon, and Geppetto exclaims that we finally have everything we need for him to turn us into a real boy. We have the Arm of God, a vast supply of Ergo, and now all he needs is the final component, our heart. Geppetto says, "Give me your heart, son." And now we must make the most important decision of the entire game. We can give our heart, or, if we've gained enough humanity, we have the option to refuse. We know Geppetto caused the puppet frenzy. Even Simon, an awful person who caused countless deaths, warned us to watch out for Geppetto. And what is he really asking of us? Give him our heart? How is that going to work? What happens to us after? He says he'll turn us into a real boy, but we're not just our heart. What about our mind, our body? Geppetto asking for our heart is the equivalent of him asking for permission to murder us. Refusing Geppetto seems to be the correct response, but surely Geppetto can't be that bad, right? He must have had a good reason for doing everything. We know he's grief-stricken from Carlo's death. He probably regrets how he treated Carlo before he died. He did make us after all. What happens if we agree? Geppetto thanks us, calls us a good boy, and gives us a hug, but that hug doesn't last long. He soon moves in to open our chest and rip out our heart. We collapse to the ground, hardly able to keep our eyes open anymore. In our final moments, we see Geppetto take our heart to the suitcase. He gives the heart to whatever is inside, and in our last glimpse of the scene, we see a human hand reach out of the suitcase. We now jump forward in time to Hotel Krot, where we see Geppetto waiting in the rain outside. Just a moment later, we see the fully human Carlo, revived and well again, walk out of the hotel, but there's blood on his shirt. Geppetto breathes a sigh of relief and says, "This finally feels like family." The music becomes triumphant very briefly before transitioning to a chaotic mess as the camera pans out to reveal all the inhabitants of Hotel Krot have been murdered. The scene cuts to black. We hear Sophia asking if this is truly the future we wanted, and we achieve the real boy ending. The phrase real boy is important thematically. If we submit to Geppetto, we admit we haven't truly understood the game's message. In a way, it's like we haven't fully matured. As such, calling us a real boy is actually an insult, as we, the player, are being called an immature child that's blindly attached to his father. This is also why our hair reverts to its original short, boyish state. It's a clever subversion of the original Pinocchio story's use of the phrase real boy. It's further emphasized by Carlo, despite having a human body, being more of Geppetto's puppet than we ever were. I don't think this is the ending that any player would want to get, and rightfully so. If we load our save file after achieving this ending, we can see that all the residents of Hotel Krot have been replaced by mindless puppets. However, Geppetto is nowhere to be found. He left us a letter, though. He tells us to stay in the hotel while he works to restore Krot to normal so they can be a happy family again. It seems that even when Geppetto finally achieves his goal of reviving Carlo, he just can't help abandoning him again. It must be in his nature or something. If it's not clear why Geppetto had Carlo kill all the hotel people, it's because he didn't want anyone to grow wise about the cause of the puppet frenzy. Humans are unpredictable, but puppets controlled by their creator are not. Alright, you probably could have guessed that trusting Geppetto was not the correct choice. In fact, we were explicitly warned of Geppetto's plans for us. Remember the King of Puppets play? In hindsight, it's about as obvious as a neon flashing sign saying, "Geppetto wants to kill you," but we just didn't have enough information at the time. We also probably gave Geppetto the benefit of the doubt, him being our father figure and also a good guy in the original Pinocchio story. So let's travel back to the Arch Abbey and make the right choice this time. Now we refuse our father. Geppetto is not happy with us. His tone of voice shifts from his normal demeanor, becoming filled with vitriol and disdain for us. He says he's disappointed in us and thought we were a good boy, but now he must perform his duty as a father and punish his naughty child. He opens the suitcase and removes his glove. His hand has the same skin tone as the other evolved humans like Laxasia and Victor, and is equipped with some sort of magical device. He casts puppet strings that lift another puppet out of the suitcase, calling it his son. Geppetto now walks away, leaving the nameless puppet to deal with us for our final battle. I love the nameless puppet as the true final boss. While it's not explicitly confirmed, the popular fan theory is that the nameless puppet was made by Geppetto using the remains of Carlo's dead body. There's a lot of evidence to support this as well. The nameless puppet clearly looks a lot fleshier than other puppets, and it's even vulnerable to acid damage, which human enemies are typically weak to. Plus, if the nameless puppet weren't Carlo's body, then are we to believe that Geppetto has a second puppet body in his suitcase? People point to the nameless puppet's Ergo description as debunking this theory, but personally I disagree. I read the description as saying the nameless puppet wasn't chosen as the vessel for Carlo's heart while it gathered Ergo. Maybe I'm overcomplicating it, but if the nameless puppet is made from Carlo's body, then the final boss fight fits perfectly with Lies of P's themes. What we have now is essentially a clash over the question I promised we would answer by the end of this video. What makes us human? Geppetto is on the side of the flesh and blood being the most important component. Geppetto never sees us as his son Carlo, despite us carrying Carlo's Ergo, and that's because we don't have Carlo's physical body. To Geppetto, his son is dead, and we are just a means to an end to revive Carlo. However, we know that we are more than just a puppet. As a very brief aside, I want to point out the imagery just before the battle starts of Geppetto turning his back and walking away from the nameless puppet. It's Geppetto abandoning Carlo one last time. Very clever. Moving on, we defeat the nameless puppet in gameplay, but not the cutscene, as it manages to sweep us off our feet and knock us to the ground. It rushes at us and lunges to stab us in the chest. We close our eyes and brace for impact, but when we open them, we're still alive, and the nameless puppet's blade has stopped just inches away from us. We now see that Geppetto has saved our life, jumping in front of the nameless puppet's attack because he saw it aim for our heart, the intended new heart for Carlo. The nameless puppet shows a rare display of an emotion besides hatred here. It demonstrates concern for Geppetto. Notice its hand in the lower corner of the screen gently moving to Geppetto. More evidence for the theory that the nameless puppet is made from Carlo's body, and some trace of Carlo is in the nameless puppet too. Regardless of why the nameless puppet is reacting this way though, it's distracted. We seize the opportunity by ripping its exposed heart out of its chest, and we crush it with our Legion arm, killing the nameless puppet for good. Geppetto slumps over and we walk over to hold him in our arms. Geppetto is a terrible person that caused the deaths of thousands for his own selfish reasons. Not only that, he was abusive and neglectful to Carlo while he was still alive. And yet, he created us, and he is still our father figure. It's very understandable for us to feel some degree of sympathy toward him, which is why we hold him in our arms. You could say it's a very human reaction. But now, everything is truly over. Geppetto will die, and we have proved our own humanity without the need for a real human body by triumphing over the nameless puppet. We stayed true to ourselves by rejecting Geppetto, and maybe now he'll finally see that we
No. You're just a useless puppet.
What? Well, alright, but we're not supposed to agree with Geppetto here. Him not seeing us as a human is in character for him. It's really unsatisfying, though, isn't it? Geppetto dies immediately after, and what happens next? Well, nothing. The game ends here rather unceremoniously, and we achieve the ending free from the puppet string. What happened? Why does the game end like this, even though we've done a good job at increasing our humanity? Well, you see, dear viewer, I've been lying to you. Raising your humanity isn't enough to achieve Lies of P's best ending. There's one more critical step. I hope you've been paying attention, because it's finally time to fit all the pieces of the puzzle together. If your goal is to study the human condition, there's no better way than my riddle position. That said, how do we know you didn't just get lucky? Even a stopped clock is right twice a day, and even a puppet can be accidentally correct just by random chance. You should reconsider that conscience of yours. It's charming, but all this guilt's just such a bore. Or maybe there's no way you can. Perhaps it's part of becoming a man. Throughout Lies of P, we've had to make a lot of decisions. With almost all of these choices, one option would give us humanity and the other would not. We need to get our humanity to a high level for the best ending. Specifically, we need to hear the Ergo whispering to be able to refuse Geppetto, and we need to feel warmth for the best ending. Why do we need such high humanity levels? Well, I think the answer is very simple. Lies of P wants to make sure we aren't doing everything correctly by accident, just like Arlecchino said. Even a puppet can be accidentally correct just by random chance. In this sentence, the term puppet is referring to us, the player. It's a stand-in for someone who doesn't understand the game's message. Only once we truly confirm that we do, by consistently making human decisions, do we earn the respect of the game to be called a human. We know humanity can be obtained in a variety of ways. Admittedly, some ways of gaining humanity are pretty mundane, like listening to records, so it alone isn't sufficient to prove we've reached human status. This is why humanity is not the only requirement. To account for this, Lies of P puts us in two important situations, sees how we respond, and judges us accordingly, because these two choices are what determines the ending we receive. Refusing or submitting your heart to Geppetto is one of them. We must deny a request from an evil person. But what if a good person makes a request of us? Sophia is our friend and faithful ally for our entire adventure. She's the one who first awakens us in Geppetto's workshop, the one who helps us level up and get stronger, and is also the in-universe explanation for our ability to respawn. Without Sophia, it's safe to say that none of our journey would be possible. As mentioned earlier, when we meet Sophia's projection at the beach of the Arch Abbey, she reveals that her real body is held captive by the alchemists. She's in immense pain and just wants her suffering to end, so she asks us to give her peace. When we find her real body after defeating Laxazia, we are given the choice of freeing her from her prison or giving her peace. What did we pick? Well, it seems in our playthrough we held on to hope that we might be able to liberate Sophia somehow and chose to spare her. It turns out, for us to achieve the best ending, we are actually required to give Sophia peace, and I find this really, really interesting. In fact, I find this so interesting because I think it proves what the game's message actually is. When faced with the question, what does it mean to be human, we've already established that the answer is not flesh and blood by defeating the nameless puppet. I would also argue it isn't just our emotions, as Arlecchino claimed. He's close, but we can be more specific than that. So then, what is the answer? We can't tell just from the free from the puppet string ending. The last line of dialogue in the story is still calling us a puppet, indicating that we have not actually become a human yet. So how does giving Sophia peace make us a human? It makes us human because it demonstrates that we have a conscience. Just like Arlecchino said in his last call, he literally tells us having a conscience is part of becoming a man. Here's a cool example that illustrates this point, Eugenie's side story. We meet a legendary stalker named Alidoro early in the game, and we can buy special weapons and amulets from him. One of Alidoro's heroic past deeds was saving Eugenie's life from the collapse of Workshop Tower. However, this Alidoro is an imposter. He killed the real Alidoro out of greed and stole his identity, and the real Alidoro was actually Eugenie's long-lost brother. He committed awful crimes in the past, sold out the hotel in the present too, and even personally wronged our friend Eugenie. So, what happens when the fake Alidoro admits the truth? The game gives us the opportunity to kill him, and what happens when we kill him? We gain humanity. Lies of P approves of us killing the fake Alidoro, or at least labels his murder as a human action. We listened to his story, evaluated if he deserved to get away with his crimes, decided he didn't, and the game liked that. Lies of P likes us using our moral compass to deliver what these characters deserve. But we can't just prove we can recognize a bad person when we see one like Geppetto and Alidoro. We also have to be able to recognize a good person. Sophia, on the other hand, has been nothing but kind to us. We know her story and all her suffering. She begs us to mercy kill her. The humane option is clearly to give her peace, which proves Lies of P's main point. It is not enough to harm or disobey others that haven't earned your help. You must also help those who have earned it. In other words, our moral compass is the key ingredient to what makes us human. What does it mean to be human? It means that you have the ability to determine right from wrong, just from unjust, good from evil. And only when we have demonstrated our ability to differentiate the two by raising our humanity, giving Sophia peace, and refusing Geppetto, do we become a human. Let's make the right choice this time. We'll rewind time just like Sophia did for us and give her the peace she begs for. We absorb her ergo and our hair turns gray, just like humans do in old age, indicating we have fully grown up. We have become mature by understanding Lies of P's message. This time, when we refuse Geppetto and defeat the nameless puppet, something different happens. Geppetto still jumps in front of the nameless puppet's sword and we hold him in our arms, but now, we shed a tear. A real human tear. Geppetto notices it, and you can see by the look in his eyes that he realizes just how wrong he was. He sacrificed so much all in a futile effort to bring his son back to life, not understanding that his son has been here with him all this time. We are human, and we don't need a body of flesh to prove it. Geppetto's new final words are, "I'm sorry, son." showing that he has finally seen us as a real person. After Geppetto's death, we cut to us somewhere else in the Arch Abbey, having found a puppet resembling Sophia. We transfer her ergo that we held within us into the puppet body, and then collapse from exhaustion. The Sophia puppet then wakes up, says, "It's so good to see you," mirroring the first time we met her, and the game truly ends. We receive the best ending, Rise of P. Once again, the name of the ending is thematically important. This ending does something special. It finally gives us a name, P. That's our character's name. The game is called Lies of P, after all. Who's the one telling lies? Well, that's our character, it's P. And P rose to humanity by demonstrating his moral compass, finally earning him a name. The game started by dehumanizing P, and it ends by humanizing him in the strongest way possible. We've now finally reached the end. Thank you so much for watching. Maybe this would have been more fitting at the beginning of the video, but I should probably introduce myself. My name is Scribble, and here on this channel, I plan to make retrospectives and analyses on all sorts of great games. This is my first video of the kind, and I had a lot of fun making it, so if you enjoyed it, please do consider leaving a like and subscribing so I'll know to make more. I've got plenty of ideas for more videos, so if you want to hear more from me, let me know by showing support for the channel. Before we truly end though, there are a couple of extra things I wanted to mention that didn't quite fit anywhere in the script. First of all, I absolutely love Lies of P's parrying system. I've never played any other game with a more satisfying parry mechanic, although that's probably because I haven't played Sekiro yet. Naturally, my favorite weapon is the two dragon swords because of its unique R2 parry. Pretty cold takes, but I wanted to say them anyway. Lastly, both a DLC and sequel are planned for Lies of P, and I am very excited for both of them. If the DLC is substantial enough, I'll make a follow-up video covering its story too. And, well, that's it for real. Thank you once again for watching, and see you next time.